This episode of Epicenter Bitcoin is brought to you by Shapeshift. With no account or sign-up required, it's the easiest way to buy and sell gems, Counterparty, Dogecoin, Dash, and other leading cryptocurrencies. Go to shapeshift.io to instantly convert your altcoins and to discover the future of cryptocurrency exchanges.
Welcome to Epicenter Bitcoin, the show which talks about the technologies, projects, and startups driving decentralization and the global cryptocurrency revolution. My name is Brian Fabian Crane.
And I'm Meher Roy. Today we are joined by Christian Decker, who is a researcher at ETH Zurich. He has a very interesting idea about scaling Bitcoin using off-chain networks. First, we would like to have an introduction from you, Christian.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having me. I'm, as you said, I'm a researcher at ETH Zurich. I am also one of the early adopters of Bitcoin, you can say. I started in 2009, a few weeks after the original paper, and I thought, heck, that's a nice thing. I would like to try that. And later, when it came time to choose a topic for my PhD, I didn't have to look too hard to basically say, hey, Bitcoin might be a good topic. Took some time to convince my professor, but in the end, it turned out to be the greatest topic he had for a long time.
Wow, I didn't realize it was 2009, because I don't know actually who's the person we've had on the show who was earliest involved in Bitcoin. So I guess Mike Hearn, was he 2009 or 2010? Gavin Andreessen was 2010, I guess, no?
I'm not sure. We actually had the first Zurich Bitcoin Meetup was in 2011 with Mike Hearn and Stefan Thomas from today's Ripple.
Right.
So
right. Yeah,
it's quite amazing how far we got with Bitcoin and similar technologies. That was an interesting meeting back then. Yeah.
So you've been interested in the topic sort of continuously since then.
Yeah. I would say I have been following Bitcoin for a long time. I think my first involvement was trying to reverse engineer the protocol. Part of the protocol specification or documentation, as it's called today, was made by me and one other guy, I guess. I was involved quite a long time. And I just stopped mining a few days ago.
Oh, really?
After 6.5 years, yeah. That kind of hurt.
So you had what, like Butterfly Labs or KNC equipment, and you were running that at home?
I had one of the first edition jalapenos, that stuck with me for a long time, and now it was time to shut it off because it's not worth it anymore.
Cool. That's fascinating. Actually, I didn't realize you had been such an early adopter and so deeply involved for such a long time.
I guess it was just lucky, and yeah, it also brought me some headlines when in 2012 9,000 bitcoins were stolen from my wallet. So
From your wallet?
Yeah, I actually managed to lose 9,000 bitcoins to a hacker, but it got me on the front page of the New York Times. So,
wow, you would have been a millionaire with that stash.
Yeah. So people keep telling me.
Yeah, I personally, I don't know if I would have paid 9,000 bitcoins to be on the front page of the New York Times. But
I mean that's one of the perks of being an early adopter, right? You somehow mined all these coins, and you didn't invest anything, and then you lost them, and so yeah.
It's like you lost a lottery ticket, but one that actually won.
So actually, that makes it particularly interesting, no? Because we have talked about this topic again and again, and we keep coming back to it, which is this sort of topic of scaling Bitcoin. And one of your ideas that we'll talk about in a little bit does relate to that. But I'm sure you, as someone who's sort of been through that whole history, you have a lot of opinions on that in general. So how how have you been participating and thinking about, this debate and controversy and arguments that are going on about, the block size increase and how Bitcoin can be scaled?
Yeah, I mean, the whole topic of the blockchain block size increase is less of a technical problem, I have to say. It's more about economics and incentives. And it also strongly depends on what we want to achieve with this network. I mean, in my first publication, I basically showed that there are some natural limits to how many transactions can the network can support, and that was 3 years ago. I basically used that as a starting off point for the remainder of my research. But the limits were a lot higher than what we are talking about today, which is 1 or 2 or 8 megabytes. I don't have the current numbers, but I would believe that we can support 16 megabyte blocks without too many problems. That's a natural limit, I'd say. At that point, the network just isn't fast enough to propagate the block through the network so that the majority knows about this block before a new block being found in the remainder of the network. That being said, we have some lower limits which are of an economical nature, meaning that at some point it just becomes unfeasible for people to participate in this network. I'm definitely not an expert on those kind of issues, but I would say we can definitely support slightly larger blocks today.
So this one is this higher limit of, you're saying 16 MB, does it come through your paper, information propagation in the Bitcoin network?
Yes, that's exactly the publication I was talking about. That's basically us trying to point out the natural limits of what the network can support, and we thought we could analyze how blockchain forks came to be, and then take the blockchain forks as an sort of a symptom of not being able to reconcile the global state of the network anymore. And we have found that larger blocks also lead to a slower propagation in the network. No, not much of a surprise there, but we have a few numbers in there as well, namely that at the time about 1 kilobyte of extra data would result in the median time of node noticing a block was delayed by 80 milliseconds. So that is probably faster today. And we do have a new publication coming out, hopefully sometime soon, which actually shows that there has been an improvement over time. But it still remains the problem that we cannot we cannot scale too quickly to larger block sizes.
So let's get like an on the ground feel for this number. So what you're saying is, if you add 1 kilobyte to the block, the median propagation time increases by 80 milliseconds. So that means if you add 1 MB to the block, it would affect the median propagation time by 80 seconds, right?
Mm-hmm.
So basically what you're saying
was back then, I have to say. So
that was back then. So let's say let's just to see, just as a thought experiment, let's say that number held true today. When you go from say 1 MB to 10 MB, so you are adding 9 more MBs, then the median propagation time would be, say, impacted 9 times into 80, so that's like 720 seconds, right? So that is over 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And 10 minutes is the block time for Bitcoin. What would happen if one block needs more than 10 minutes to propagate to the network? What would happen to the network in that scenario?
So our expectation is that the first block would basically split the network in half, because by the time we have reached a majority of the network, we already have a second block propagating through the network, or we have in expectation one block propagating in the network already. So that way we would definitely create a hard blockchain fork. Now, the resulting network is smaller, so the two partitions of the network are smaller, but they will work on competing blockchain forks, right? Now, it is possible that we then find another block in one of these partitions and find again another block in this partition. At this point, we have a three-headed blockchain fork, and this will not be resolved in a single next round of blocks being found, right? So what we actually lose is one confirmation on the number of confirmations we have to await for us to be certain that the transaction goes through. And the extreme case is that we actually fork off indefinitely.
Yeah, so basically you start having, but let's say if you take this scale this back a little bit, we say, okay, it's not 720 seconds, so 12 minutes, but let's say it's 4 minutes that it takes to propagate. Then we are still left with a scenario that there are a lot of forks all the time, and they go deeper than just one block. They can happen 2 blocks deep, or maybe even 3 in a worst case, in a bad case. So you start having very probably behaviors that you don't want.
So I mean, the one thing we will have for sure is that we lose certainty into what this being confirmed in a transaction actually means. Today, we can be reasonably sure that if my transaction ends up in a block, then that means that, yes, it is being confirmed, right? Today's blockchain fork rate is about 1.5%, meaning that we have about 2.5 forks every day. If we have this sort of higher fork rate, then we suddenly lose this certainty, and we need more confirmations for us to regain this certainty. On the other dimension, we have now a lot of computational resources being spent in a network to work on forks, which are eventually going to be orphaned, and that might be even the scenario which is worse, because now we are having this huge number of fights between mining pools and lots of resources being wasted, and we actually facilitate a large miner who might not have 50% or more. Suddenly he needs much less. He has to fight only against other pools that suffer this delay in propagation, while he doesn't have to. So this all plays into sort of selfish mining again, which gets easier if you have a high blockchain fork rate.
So in essence, what you're saying is, let's assume that 60% of the mining power is in China, and then 40% is in the United States. Just quite simply. So what you're saying is, because a block made in China needs a lot of time to propagate to a block made in the United States, the 60% of the miners in China, because they hear about the blocks earlier, as a cartel, they can come to a situation where they keep dominating the American miners every time. And effectively, in order to get like 51% of the network, you just have to be in China, a Chinese miner, and have more than half of their 60%, which is like 30%. And like your effective power in the network is like a 51% miner, because you can always outcompete the American ones due to the block propagation problems.
Yes, you are by adding delay into the propagation, then you are basically weakening the remainder of the network compared to the block finder. So we don't need to go as far as saying, hey, this is China and this is the rest of the world. We just need to say, we have a group here which is strongly connected with really, really fast connections, and the next block is being found in this cluster. And then we have a weakly connected other cluster, and the cluster which has not found the block will be at a disadvantage over the cluster that has found the block, because they will hear it later.
Right. I mean, I think that's why the episode we Meher and Sebastian did on Bitcoin NG, I thought is such a nice proposal, because it just gets rid of so many of these problems.
Yeah, you resolve quite a lot of the races there. It's a really interesting proposal, and Emin Günzira, one of the authors, will be present at my defense later in January. So I hope I get to talk to him about that proposal as well and see what we can do with it.
So defense, of course, being for your PhD thesis, because you're doing a PhD thesis about Bitcoin at the moment.
Yeah.
So talking about PhD thesis, I think perhaps this is a good segue to talk about your research and the one project that I think you are known for that has some attention in is your Duplex network, and Duplex being essentially like the Lightning Network, which I think a lot of people know, and we've done a show about as well. So can you talk a bit about how you came to work on that?
So we had some research before that concentrating on how to extract application data from blockchain, from the Bitcoin blockchain. And once we finished that, we noticed that there is a possibility to actually scale up the number of transactions that the current blockchain can support, but simply moving all of these transfers off the blockchain. And we then started. We basically took the simple micropayment channel, which is implemented which was implemented by Mike Hearn into Bitcoin J, and which we had used before, and thought, okay, there's a limitation there. We lock in funds into this channel, and we can transfer it at most once from one end to the other, simply because, well, there is no way to move these coins back. So what we thought we would like to do is to simply have construction where we can send money both ways, hence the duplex in the title. And we use the construction which starts creating two simple micropayment channels between two peers, one going in one direction and the other one going in the other direction. Now the problem is that, if you charge these channels on both ends with 1 Bitcoin, and you send 1 Bitcoin in one direction and the other Bitcoin in the other direction, then there is this guy still has some credit on these construction of two channels, but it's on the wrong channel. He cannot send it back to this. So what we try to do is basically just take these sets or these pairs of simple micropayment channels, flip them over, and now having credit back on the channel that you can actually spend from. That took a bit more of a detour than we were planning to, but in the end we had I would say really nice and really clean construction that actually achieved this, having two simple micropayment channels which can be reset if the capacity on one of them is consumed and you'd like to transfer capacity from one to the other.
So maybe just to give a little bit of background, because I'm sure some people will not be familiar with payment channels. And basically the idea is, as far as I understand it, and of course feel free to correct me, is that, right, you say on Bitcoin, the number of transactions is sort of limited, but what you can do is you can sort of lock up Bitcoins, or you can sort of put them in a multi-sig address that, you know, only several people can spend together. And then you sort of go offline and you send each other signed transactions. So you can basically move money around, and you still can do it securely because the person can sort of go back to the Bitcoin network to sort of claim their money. But while you're moving these transactions around, well, you don't actually have to, you know, you don't have to wait for confirmations. You don't have to put them in a block, right? So you can sort of have your cake and eat it too, in terms that you have the security of the blockchain, but you don't have all the downsides of it, such as, you know, limits and the costs and the speed. But you can do it immediately and much cheaper, much faster.
So yeah, basically the micropayment channels, both the simple one as well as the duplex micropayment channel, as well as the Lightning Network, are a form of smart contracts. Smart contracts basically allow you to encode part of your business logic into the scripting language used by Bitcoin. And at any point in time, the parties participating in this contract have the assurance that what has been agreed on will eventually take effect. And we use the blockchain only to set up these contracts, and in the end to either settle them or to mediate some conflict we had between us. And the important part in all of this is that at any point in time, all parties have the assurance that what has been agreed upon will actually take place. And this assurance comes in the form of a transaction which, if we want to settle or if you want to have conflict mediation, then we just take these transactions, broadcast them into the Bitcoin network, and the Bitcoin network will take care of resolving our conflict.
So in your like around 5 minutes ago, you went through kind of 3 iterations of micropayment channels. You started with the simple one, and then you moved into one where so you started with the simple one, which is Meher paying Christian.
Yeah.
And only Meher can pay Christian, and that's it. So this is the kind of micropayment channel that our listeners would be aware. We discussed on the episode with Streamium, where somebody is streaming a video and the other person wants to look at the video and pay him money. So in that case, the money only needs to flow from the person who is seeing a stream to the person who is creating a stream. So it's only in one direction.
Yeah.
That was the simplest one that was invented by Mike Hearn and Spielman.
Yeah.
Then you went into these 2 other kinds of channels in which money can flow in both directions, like from Meher to Christian and Christian to Meher. And then you went into the third most complex one, in which not only can the money flow in both directions, but the liquidity is also saved. Like you don't need to lock up as much money as in the second design, right?
Yes. So the difference is in the second scenario you mentioned, we just have 2 channels in both directions, right? And we cannot transfer more than what has been allocated to either of the channels. In the second case, we are still using simple micropayment channels for both directions. But what we can do now is we take the money or the coins that are bound to one channel and are therefore bound to move only in one direction, and we flip them from one channel to the other in an atomic way. So that way, suddenly, if I transfer 0.5 Bitcoins to you, and you transfer your whole Bitcoin on your channel to me back, then you still have credit for 0.5 Bitcoins, but they are bound to the wrong channel. So what we do now is we destroy the 2 channels. We build up 2 new channels, and now I have a channel from which I can send 1.5 Bitcoins to you, and you have a channel where you can send 0.5 Bitcoins from you to me, which was the amount I previously sent to you, right?
Let me just interject here, because I think there's one thing we need to briefly explain so people can make sense of that, unless they remember the Streamium episode well, right? Which is that you can only go sort of in one direction in a channel, right? Because if I give Meher, 0.2 of that Bitcoin in the channel, then Meher has the option to like cash in that 0.2 in the Bitcoin blockchain. Now I can say I give you 0.3 and that works, right? Because Meher can cash in either one, but of course he's only going to take the bigger one. But he can't give me money back on that channel, right? Because let's say he signs a new transaction that gives me only 0.25. I can't rely on that because at any time Meher could cash the 0.3, right? So you have that problem that if you've gone in one direction in a channel, well, you can't go the other way, right? And so now what you're saying is there's basically a way to sort of flip that so you can start going the other way.
Yes. So the problem in a simple micropayment channel is exactly what I was talking about before, that if you receive some money, you will always have the assurance in the form of a transaction giving you that money, that you can get that money. If you transfer it back, I cannot destroy your assurance. But so what we do is basically we destroy the whole setup until you get to this assurance, replacing the whole construction. What Lightning does is basically finding a way to replace your assurance with something that basically hurts you if you try to cash in that one.
So I think this is the crucial point which is kind of hard to appreciate. So let's just walk through this one. So what's happening in a normal micropayment channel? In a normal micropayment channel, when let's say it's between Meher and Christian in the beginning. So when I want to send you one Bitcoin, like for example, let's say you're creating content and I want to pay you for the content, and then I foresee that the maximum amount I will spend on this content is 1 Bitcoin. So in the normal case, the way it would work is we would create a multi-signature address and lock that 1 Bitcoin in that joint account which is owned by both you, Christian, and me, Meher. So both of us are joint owners of that 1 Bitcoin, and we can imagine this as a cake. And then we are just so this cake is created on the Bitcoin blockchain, and this cake has a time lock. So if nothing happens, the cake will be divided. Like I will get the 1 Bitcoin back, let's say 1 day later, and Christian will get nothing. So that's the cake, and 1 day later I get to eat the cake completely if nothing else happens. Now, off the blockchain, Christian and I can figure out a way of dividing this cake amongst each other. So I can send a statement to Christian that says, okay, now Christian gets 2% of the cake and I get only 98% of the cake. And we don't broadcast this to the blockchain, but once our transaction is over, Christian could take that 2%, broadcast it to the blockchain, and get the actual Bitcoins in return, right? So that's the simple micropayment channel case. Now, what you're saying is the problem with this case is the money can only flow from Meher to Christian, but you could always imagine that we could make 2 different cakes. So
yes.
If Christian, so let's say now we are in a different scenario where both the people are providing services to each other. So like Meher is streaming content and Christian is also streaming content, and both of them like want to pay each other. So you can create 2 cakes. So 1 cake for payment flow from Meher to Christian, and then another cake for payment flow from Christian to Meher. And then you start to decide what percentage of each cake does Meher own and what percentage of each cake does Christian own. And then once this division is complete, both of us broadcast the transactions to the network and we split our funds.
Yeah.
Right. So these are the first 2 basic scenarios. And now what you're saying is the Duplex Micropayment Channel adds something, a third capability to this scenario.
Yeah. So what we do is once we have so I gave you all of my cake, but I do own about, let's say, half of the cake, of the other cake. Then what we do is we just say, okay, let's forget about all of that. Now I create a new cake which is half of the previous cake, which I can send from me to you, and on the other side we create a cake which is worth 1.5 cakes, which you can send to me. And we have reset basically the whole scenario, and we can restart trading again. So what happens now is that I can actually send you more than 1 cake in total, and you can send me more than 1 cake in total. Due to this reset, we can actually have millions and millions of, we can transfer these coins or cakes or whatever you want to call them. We can transfer them multiple times. So that's the whole idea of the construction, yeah.
So basically, in an optimal scenario, we are left with millions of cakes.
In an optimal scenario, I owe you 1,000 cakes and you owe me 1,000 cakes. And so we don't have to transfer anything.
No, I'm certainly glad that we've extensively talked about cakes, because this is a topic we've completely neglected so far in the history of this podcast. But it's obviously very important. Our show today is brought to you by our friends at Shapeshift.io. Shapeshift is the fast and easy way to trade altcoins, and they now support over 50 cryptocurrencies, which includes all the ones you have ever heard of, unless you have no life and spend way too much time on Bitcoin talk. So if you want to trade altcoins, there's the old way of doing it, which means creating an account somewhere, giving them all your data, depositing your money, and then growing old while hoping for the best. Or there's the Shapeshift way, which is fast, easy, and means getting it all done in less than a minute while not even needing an account.
So here's something to consider. Shapeshift is a company that really stands by its values and goes out of its way to protect users' private data. One way they do this, obviously, is by not requiring you to give them any personal information to use a service, since you can't even create an account to use it. And secondly, when BitLicense was enacted in the US, Shapeshift was the first company to say, screw this, we're not standing for this nonsense. And what they immediately did was move the company out of the US and into Switzerland. So Shapeshift is a company that really believes in the core values and core ideals of Bitcoin. And we think that's very honorable and very cool. And plus, by sponsoring shows like ours, they really help entertain people like you and help promote growth in the industry. So good job, Shapeshift, for doing what's right. And we'd like to thank Shapeshift for their support of Epicenter Bitcoin.
So one of the ways, or one of the things we should talk about here, and we've talked about this in the Lightning Network context as well. So in Lightning Network, there's this concept of, I don't remember what their name is, but basically you have these like hubs that connect different people, right? Because if it's between me and you, then we can set this up and it's pretty simple. But of course, you don't want to have to set up these connections between every single party that's doing business, because that's going to be even less efficient than Bitcoin today. But you want to set up a few, and then somehow you can like hop like between different sort of routes. So you can have each person can have a bunch of connections, and if everyone has a bunch of connections, you can sort of route through everyone and pay between each other. So how does that work? And you call it payment service provider. What do those entities look like, and what is their function?
So the idea of payment service providers actually comes from internet service providers, because, well, if I want to contact Google, for example, I'm not drawing a new cable from my PC to Google every time I want to do a transfer. But I am connecting to my ISP, and my ISP will forward the payment on my behalf, right? If we were to draw a cable every time we want to do a connection, we would actually pretty soon deplete the copper resources we have in the world, and we would make use of this shared medium, which is, well, copper. In the Bitcoin case, we also have a shared medium. It's called the blockchain. Its size is limited. We cannot do too much about it. So we try to keep as much as possible in a local fashion. We don't we don't just shout out into the world, hey, I'd like to talk to Google, but we are actually sending our packets to our local ISP, which will then forward them. So that's the way. That's why we call them payment service provider. Yeah, that's the basic idea of it. In the end, it turns out that unlike ISPs, we do not really have to trust these payment service providers, because we have a number of options which we can use to ensure that if we send them some money, they will actually forward it to the endpoint. The most trivial one, of course, being, since we now do local transactions only, we can, I mean, if I'm okay with losing a cent, I can just send 1 cent to the next hop, see if it arrives, and if it arrives, if I get an okay from the merchant I'm trying to buy my coffee from, I can just send the next cent. A much more complex construction would be the HTLC, the hash time lock contracts, which actually allow us to build end-to-end security and ensure that the one transfer actually ends up at the destination.
So let's walk through a scenario in which Brian is our payment service provider. So I want to transfer you money, and now, like, in my head, I'm imagining this as 2 cakes. There's a cake between me and Brian that we can, let's say I want to be very rich. So in my imaginary scenario, I want to have 100 BTC in the cake between me and Brian. And let's also make Brian very rich by having 100 BTC in the cake between Brian and Christian. And now Meher wants to pay Christian. So how would that work? Like, I want to pay you 1 Bitcoin, and I have 100 BTC locked in a channel with Brian, and Brian has 100 BTC locked in a duplex channel with you.
So basically what, well, we already have the network set up, right? All you need to do is basically you send the money to Brian, and then Brian sends it to me. And then I tell you, hey, by the way, I received your money, all is good. Now, how we achieve that is a bit dependent on how we want to do it. There is this small incremental type of transactions where you send a millionth of a Bitcoin to Brian. Brian sends a millionth of Bitcoin to me, and then I say, hey, go ahead for the next millionth, until we eventually have transferred the whole amount. And all Brian can do is basically say, yeah, sorry, I'm not forwarding this, and he may have gained 1 millionth of a Bitcoin. In the HTLC scenario, what we do is we basically secure the transfer using a secret. So I invent a secret, I transfer you a derivative of that secret, from which you cannot derive the secret. You cannot reconstruct the secret anymore. Specifically, it's a hash. And what you then do is you tell Brian, hey, I will transfer you 100 millibitcoin if you can tell me the secret matching this hash. And then Brian does not know the secret to matching that hash. So he is forced, in order to get his money, to contact me and ask me and tell me, hey, if you can tell me the secret matching this hash, I will give you 100 millibitcoin. So me, being the one who invented the secret, can now say, okay, here's the secret, and give me my 100 millibitcoin, please. Now Brian goes to you and tells you, hey, here's the secret, please give me my 100 millibitcoin. And by doing that, we have completed the whole transaction. And at the same time, I have given you a receipt that I have actually received the money. Otherwise, I couldn't have claimed it.
So let's look at the leg between you and Brian. So in a sense, you are giving Brian the secret, and Brian is supposed to give you 100 millibitcoin.
Yeah.
But how does that work? Can't you just take that 100 millibitcoin and not give Brian the secret? On the other side, can't Brian just take the secret and not give you the 100 milli Bitcoin?
No, because that is part of the smart contract we have constructed, right? In this smart contract, we both parties are always assured that one party misbehaving cannot work against the contract. And so the contract is set up in such a way that in order to claim the money, I actually have to reveal on the blockchain the secret. And that is being done with, well, the scripting language in Bitcoin. And hence I call it encoding part of the business logic in the Bitcoin scripting language. So either you give the secret or the transaction is not valid.
So how does that compare with the Lightning Network? What are the main differences here?
So the construction of the HTLCs is identical to Lightning, which also means that Duplex Micropayment Channels and Lightning Network are interoperable. We can easily imagine a network which is composed of a number of Lightning nodes and a number of Duplex Micropayment service providers, because we can, by having the same HTLC construction, we can ensure that independently of how the transfer is implemented, we have this backtracing phase in which a secret is sent back through the same route to the origin of the transfer.
Okay, that's great to hear, because I recently talked with Touch from the Lightning Network, who wrote the paper right at the time when we had them on the show. They weren't working on implementing it, but now they are, and so is Joseph. And then also at Blockstream, right, they hired Rusty Russell, who's also working on implementing a Lightning Network, and I think they are sort of coordinating to make sure that that's also going to be compatible. So does that mean, are you also working on actually implementing that and actually bringing that to Bitcoin?
Yeah, I'm currently working a bit on the preliminaries, but I do plan on implementing the whole network stack of the Duplex Micropayment Channel. We also had one student here at ETH doing the next layer of things, which is basically a BGP-inspired routing protocol, because even if we had a Lightning Network or Duplex Micropayment Channel today, we would still need a way to somehow find a route from the sender of a payment to the endpoint of a payment through this network of interconnected payment service providers or Lightning hubs. So I am planning on implementing it. It's going a bit slow because this whole business of pushing a BIP, which we need to actually secure all of this through the review process, is slow, and yeah, there have been a few setbacks on that side.
So is that the transaction malleability fix?
Yes, in order for all of this to be secure, we actually need to ensure that there is no way of disconnecting a transaction from its predecessor. With this off-blockchain protocols, we build chains of interdependent transactions which are not confirmed on the blockchain. And we need to ensure that if this transaction is building on this one, then we cannot change this the hash of this one. Otherwise, the reference from this transaction back to the first transaction would not be valid anymore. That's what generally is called transaction malleability.
Okay, and so all Lightning and Duplex, they depend on this in the same way.
Yes. So transaction malleability has, it would be really nice to have a fix for that, also because Mt. Gox then couldn't claim anymore that it is to blame for their $500 million loss there.
Well, they can still say that was the cause, no? So
well, we have a paper actually proving that it wasn't the case, but
right. Yeah, I mean, it was never very plausible.
Today's magic word is Duplex, Duplex. Head over to letstalkbitcoin.com to sign in, enter the magic word, and claim your part of the listener reward.
So that's great. So let's say that fix happens with transaction availability. I mean, is there a significant resistance? Are some people saying we don't want that? Or are there people who think it should be done in different ways and can't come to agreement? Or what's the sort of roadblock there?
So it's always the devil is in the detail. It's I published about, what was it? I think August, I published a Bitcoin improvement proposal for normalized transaction IDs, which changed a little bit the way the hash used to reference a transaction is computed. Basically, it was stripping out all the information that could have been modified on the flight without invalidating the hash, the signature. And initially, it was a hard fork proposal. That did not sit too well with a few developers, so I made it a software proposal, which I published in September. And now, well, everybody wants their nice feature in there as well. So I have been rewriting it a few times now. And while discussing with Peter, we actually came up with a much better solution. And so Peter and Greg basically came up with a way to implement the segregated witnesses, which are implemented in Elements Alpha, to basically backport that to Bitcoin and hopefully fix malleability forever.
Okay, and there are people can align around that idea, or that sounds plausible that that's going to happen?
So I think the segregated witnesses proposal is so far the easiest, even if not the easiest to implement. So the segregated witnesses is of course in production in Elements Alpha, and it is a good solution for the problem at hand. My proposals were a bit easier to implement. Actually, I have implemented them, and but segregated witnesses seems to be the proposal everyone is rallying behind. And so I guess that has a good chance of being merged sometime in the future.
So assuming that transaction malleability is solved, can you go into how somebody could become a payment service provider and make money building a business around it?
So the requirement for you to become a payment service provider is have some Bitcoins. Because you initially when you set up these channels, you need some coins to fund the channel so that you can actually start transferring Bitcoins. That being said, we have not figured out how yet to do addressing in this network and how to assign addresses in this network, simply because for this kind of routing to be efficient, we need to have some sort of structure in this network. For example, ISPs use prefix-based routing, and that would be cool if we could do that in PSPs as well. So the second requirement would be to actually be integrated into that network and start opening channels with other people. Now, on the earning money part, you can attach fees to these transfers as well. So just as you would attach a fee to a transaction you send into the blockchain, you can attach a fee to the transfer you're doing in the Duplex Micropayment Channel network, and every hop in the network would then draw some of a part of that fee from your transfer until at the end the last hop eats up all the fees, and what comes out at the end is just the amount you wanted to transfer in the first place.
Basically, with every hop, Meher gets some cake.
Yes.
So basically, like, if I become a payment service provider, what I really need is to be Bitcoin rich. So I need a stash of Bitcoins that I can put in creating channels with a lot of different people, right? That's what I need. And what would make a good payment service provider? Somebody who has a lot of channels open with a lot of different people?
So, I mean, it is important to make the entry barrier as low as possible. So that's also why we created these duplex micropayment channels in the first place. If you had a hub and spoke model, then you have the problem that you have to be really rich to cover all the transfers that go through you. In the duplex micropayment channel network, you would have a small amount, let's say 1 Bitcoin, associated with each channel. And since you can now transfer it multiple times back and forth, this Bitcoin now becomes much more, you get much more out of this single Bitcoin than if you could transfer it once. The barrier to entry is low in that you're not forced to have a certain number of connections you have to open. All you need to do to get started is to open 2 connections and then route payments through you between the 2 endpoints you are connecting to. And once you have more cash, you can then open new connections and position yourself better in the network so that you are more central to the network and somehow more payments get routed through you.
Okay, so perhaps this is a nice opportunity to explain the difference between Lightning and your proposal. So if I understood it correctly, what you are saying is, in scenario 1, let's assume like Brian and Meher are both payment service providers on Lightning. And in scenario 2, Brian and Meher are payment service providers on the Duplex network, right? Now, in scenario 1, so when both of us are payment service providers, it's a scenario where you need money to flow frequently from Meher to Brian and from Brian to Meher, because Christian might be a customer of Meher, Sebastian might be a customer of Brian, and then sometimes Christian wants to pay Sebastian, sometimes Sebastian wants to pay Christian. So the payments are flowing in a lot of different directions. So in scenario 1, Lightning, so the difference between scenario 1 Lightning and scenario 2 Duplex is that in scenario 1, Meher and Brian would need to create a channel, destroy it again, create a new one, destroy it again. While in Duplex Micropayment, Meher and Brian create a channel once and they can operate with it, operate with that single channel, like route many more payments to that single channel as compared to Lightning. Is that the advantage of the Duplex network?
So I think so in both cases, in the Lightning Network case and in the Duplex Micropayment Channel case, the channels have a lifetime, which is limited. Some say that a channel will be active for a month or for a year, but in both cases, they are not endless. And they are, in fact, pretty similar because the overall effect achieved by Lightning and by a Duplex Micropayment Channel is pretty much identical. Where we differ is the construction of the channels. So I read an early version of the Lightning paper, and it took me a really, really long time to figure out what they are actually doing. What we did is we basically started from the 2 simple micropayment channels, combined them into a 2-directional channel, and then figured out how to reset them. I think our construction is a bit easier to understand because it's built on well-known blocks that we basically analyze individually, and we can show that they are working. Whereas Lightning is a bit more complex in that all of these parts are very much dependent on each other, and you cannot strip them apart and analyze them independently. So I wouldn't say that duplex micropayment channels and Lightning are completely different because they achieve the same goals with sort of the same guarantees. But the construction and the ease of implementation varies a lot. And hopefully, me being the author of Duplex Micropayment Channels, I, of course, would argue that mine is easier to implement and hopefully get it correct.
Okay, so the advantage of your approach is the ease of implementation.
Yes.
Oh, okay. And so one final question on this topic. So now we have kind of moved from, so when we move from Bitcoin, the blockchain, to the Lightning Network or to the Duplex Network, we are moving away from something that is decentralized and censorship resistant to a structure that that has payment service providers, like for example me, that can be that have to comply with government regulations, etc. Right? Now, now the advantage of this kind of seems to be that because I can't steal any funds as a payment service provider, for the end customer, it means that they can use any payment service provider in the world, and they don't need to trust any of the payment service providers, which in turn means that for the payment service providers, I can go and set up in any country which has easy rules to become a Bitcoin payment service provider, set up my business there. Even if the customer does not trust the country I'm operating out of, it doesn't matter because it's trustless, right?
Yeah, so we certainly maintain the security in the sense of the coins cannot be stolen by an intermediary. And I'm pretty sure that these intermediaries will eventually also be regulated. That being said, it should be really easy to set up an intermediary or, well, a payment service provider. There is no license. All you need to do is to insert yourself into the network, fund a few channels, and start transferring coins for other people, and basically start earning. As for moving to a country where the regulation is lenient, that's not strictly necessary. I mean, you can operate all of this over a Tor, and it's relatively low traffic. So I'm pretty sure we wouldn't annoy Tor so much that they would ban us, and by basically obfuscating your location, you have achieved the same goal. You have achieved the same goal as moving to a country that has lenient policies, so yeah, there is very little trust in all of this, and you are free to choose whatever payment service provider you want to. We have an additional advantage. So some people have asked me whether there is a privacy concern, because now all my payments go through a payment service provider. All that payment service provider sees is what is the equivalent of the information I would have published on the blockchain anyway. That, and he does know which IP address I'm using. So what we do is we actually keep this information off the blockchain, and I would argue that in that sense we are even more private than we were in the blockchain scenario.
Right, because you make it much harder for the services like Chainalysis or the companies that do clustering of entities and all that with information on the blockchain, but also network monitoring, right? And that's going to be much harder too. Right? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you want to be private, just open a connection to a number of payment service providers and just randomize who you are going to send the transaction to, or pretend to be a payment service provider yourself and you're routing payments on behalf of other people. So it becomes much easier to obfuscate what you are doing in the network.
Yeah, I think that's a big strength. So one of the things, once when we had Mike Hearn on, we talked with him about Lightning Network 2, and I think he made a really important pointer, and he also wrote about this elsewhere, and that the problem starts to be that it becomes much more complicated from sort of a wallet perspective about how do you implement that? And of course, you do have this sort of thing. Let's say if people, I can't pay at a restaurant using Lightning Network or Duplex unless the party receiving it has also switched to that. So you sort of need the whole network, or at least significant portions of the network, to switch over to that to have the sort of the real benefit. Is this a problem that it's just too complex to implement for a lot of the wallets? And maybe not for the big ones, but we have wallets like the Bitcoin Android wallet or Electrum, where it's small projects with basically one main developer.
So yeah, there is definitely added complexity to implementing a wallet. But you can get away with implementing only part of it. You don't need to do all the It's not every wallet that needs to do all of the work. And where there is this bootstrapping phase, you mentioned that some people don't use this network. There's an opportunity for intermediaries to actually do this translation. So BitPay, for example, is successful because they allow people to accept payments on a network where the receivers are not actually on the network itself, but they would like to be able to accept these payments. I do see the difficulty with the added complexity, but I think if we can make it easier for these protocols to be implemented, then we sort of reduce this downside. And that's also what I've been aiming for is a protocol which is easy to implement and hopefully get it right. I would not trust myself to implement Lightning correctly.
So one final question, and this regards to Ethereum. Can you implement duplex micropayment channels in Ethereum, and would that be easier? The second part of this question is, can Ethereum enable like the next generation of Lightning networks or duplex micropayment channels?
And this, I do have to be honest, I'm not an expert on Ethereum, but I think we cannot take duplex micropayment channels or Lightning and translate them directly to Ethereum, simply because Ethereum makes the assumption that we have this global synchronized state, and on which we are operating. And the other problem is that we have to have fungibility in what we transfer. In all of the descriptions we had before, we silently accepted that the coins that I want to transfer to you, you don't care whether I send you directly my coins or whether you receive Brian's coins. So the fact that I can transfer 100 millibitcoins to Brian and he can then send you 100 millibitcoins means that it's not the same 100 millibitcoins that are directly going from me to you, but it's different coins. So we do have to keep this fungibility or exchangeability of objects we transfer. But I do think there are venues where we can actually have sort of the same things or the same setting, which would allow different applications to also use duplex micropayment channels. For example, one thing would be if we have asset tracking networks, and I have an asset or I have a connection of an asset I want to transfer from me to Brian and from Brian to you, then if we all have the same asset and it is fungible, then I can transfer it to you without any problem. Whether Ethereum can enable the next generation of off-blockchain smart contracts, pretty sure it can. I mean, the Ethereum scripting language, which is what we use to encode the business logic in all of this, is basically a superset of the Bitcoin scripting language.
So I'm also not an expert on this, but it would seem to me that probably if all you're talking about is, let's say, moving Ether, then you should probably be able to do something like the Lightning Network on Ethereum, right? But then, of course, as soon as you start talking about interacting with contracts and more complex things, then that probably breaks down.
Yes, exactly. So Ether is just as fungible as Bitcoins are. So I don't see any problem in transferring Ether. You're right. I was talking about contracts directly, and they rely on a global state being synchronized.
Cool, excellent. Well, thanks so much for coming on. So we're basically up with our time. We had another topic we wanted to talk about, which is an interesting proposal you have called a peer census. It's sort of like quite out there and unusual, but very interesting. And I was looking forward to talking about that, but unfortunately, the Duplex stuff and Lightning Network stuff is so complex that one just gets sort of stuck there. But we'll link to the paper in our show notes. If people are interested in checking out, they can do so. And yeah, well, we'll see. Maybe we can come back to the topic at some point.
Sure, I'd love to.
Yeah, so thanks so much for coming on. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much for having me.
That is it from our side. And now, as we mentioned, like links to Christian's website and his papers will all be in the show notes. And you know, we put out episodes of this every Monday, so you can subscribe to it on iTunes. You can get it on Android or your favorite podcast app. And of course, you can also watch the videos on youtube.com/epicenterbitcoin. And if you're a loyal listener, you know what's coming now is that we have been doing this t-shirt bribery contest, which basically means if you leave us a review, let us know, then we'll send you a t-shirt. So if you do so, please send us an email at show@epicenterbitcoin.com. Now, one brief heads up here is that we're sort of out of most t-shirts, so we'll have to get them produced and it will take a little bit longer. But yeah, that's it. So thanks so much, and we look forward to being back next week.
Esta idea me vino hoy especialmente cuando vi otra vez una chica ahí pidiendo dinero por la calle. Actually, I must say first, this idea today I got especially when I saw again one girl begging for money in the streets. Me gustaría ayudar, pero yo tampoco me sobra mucho el dinero. I would really like to help everybody, but I don't have either too much money. And así que me vino la siguiente idea. So I got the following idea. Es más bien un juego. It's rather a game. Lo que es muy importante, elegir un monedero de Bitcoin que solo tú misma tienes la llave privada. What is very important to choose Bitcoin wallet company which you only possess the private key. For example, blockchain.info. Por ejemplo, la empresa blockchain.info. Luego, imprimir en papel la llave privada y también guardarlo tú mismo. Then to print in paper the private key and of course save for yourself that private key. Bueno, ya estamos imprimiendo, imprime por lo menos 10. So now we are already printing, so at least print 10 directions, 10 direcciones. Luego pones algo de Bitcoin, una cantidad, lo que te da la gana en esta dirección. Then you put some Bitcoin, the amount, whatever you want, in these directions. Y la próxima vez que sales de casa ya tienes algo que dar a los que están ahí pidiendo por la calle. And the next time you go out of the house, you have already something to give for these people who are begging on the streets. Y por ejemplo, y claro, para tus amigos, amigas, and for your friends, of course. Eso da motivación a la gente para aprender Bitcoin y this gives motivation for the people to learn about Bitcoin. Y la parte del juego consiste en lo siguiente, and the game part consists in the following. Explicas a la gente, mira, esta es la clave privada, que es la clave secreta. You explain to the people, look, this is the private key, which must be secret. And you have it, and me, and explicas, esa persona y yo mismo la tiene. Y antes pensaba en 5 años, pero luego cambié un poco de idea de hasta 4 años. First I thought of 5 years, but then I changed my opinion to 4 years, later explain. Después lo explico por qué. Les dices, mira, tienes 4 años para poner esta cantidad de Bitcoin a otra dirección. Si no lo has quitado después de 4 años, yo lo quito. So you explain them, you have 4 years to take these Bitcoin out of this direction, of this secret key direction. If you don't do it, I do it after these 4 years, so you lose this. That's this part of the game, es la parte del juego. He creado este hashtag BTC4 para hacerlo un poco popular. I created this hashtag BTC4 to make it a little popular. Antes pensaba en 5 años, pero luego cambié a 4 porque te has dado cuenta que en Los Simpson la gente tiene 4 dedos y solo Dios tiene 5 dedos. First, I thought of 5 years, but then I changed my mind to 4 years. Did you notice that in The Simpsons, people have 4 fingers and only God has 5 fingers? I'll show some pictures. Voy a enseñar algunas imágenes de Los Simpsons, de los manos y dedos de Simpsons. Some pictures of the hands and fingers of Simpsons. Pero antes quiero recordar que es muy probable que en también 4 o 5 en los próximos años el valor de Bitcoin puede subir mucho. Just want to remember before that the price of Bitcoin, the value of Bitcoin can rise very much in these next years. Así que si solo pones una cantidad pequeña, más tarde puede ser de gran ayuda. Even if you just put a little small amount, later it can be big help. No solo para, bueno, es un juego. Si la persona lo quita antes de 4 años, es para esta persona, si no, es para ti, si te recuerdas y guardas bien la llave privada. So this is the game part. If the person takes the money out, it's for that person. But if they forget it after these 4 years, you can take it out. And it can be really...
Bueno, imprimir también la llave pública y la llave privada. Y si, por ejemplo, okay, first translate. Print not just the private key, but also the public key. Así que si, por ejemplo, explicas a la gente, mira, si alguna persona quiere enviarte Bitcoin, pero tú no tienes ninguna dirección, así que puedes dar esta llave pública a la persona. Mira, muy bien, la llave pública, no la llave secreta. Das a esa persona o cualquier persona y te pueden enviar Bitcoin a esa dirección. So remember, the public key you can give to anybody, and if somebody wants to send you some Bitcoin and this person doesn't have any, so you have already this public address where they can send you Bitcoin.
¿Qué es Bitcoin? Bitcoin es la primera moneda digital descentralizada. Los Bitcoins son monedas digitales que puedes enviar a través de Internet. Comparado con otras alternativas, Bitcoin tiene numerosas ventajas. Los Bitcoins son transferidos directamente de persona a persona a través de la red sin pasar por un banco u otro intermediario. Esto significa que las comisiones son mucho menores, puedes usarlo en cualquier país, tu cuenta no puede ser congelada y no hay prerequisitos o límites arbitrarios. Miremos cómo funciona. Los bitcoins son generados en todo Internet por cualquiera con un programa gratuito llamado minero de Bitcoin. Crear bitcoins requiere una cierta cantidad de trabajo para cada bloque de monedas. Esta cantidad se ajusta automáticamente por la red para que los bitcoins siempre sean creados a un ratio predecible y limitado. Tus bitcoins se guardan en tu billetera digital, que te resultará familiar si usas banca digital. Cuando transfieres bitcoins, una firma electrónica es añadida. Pasados unos minutos, la transacción es verificada por el minero y es almacenada permanente y anónimamente por la red. El software de Bitcoin es completamente abierto y cualquiera puede revisar el código. Bitcoin está cambiando las finanzas de la misma manera que la web ha cambiado el periodismo. Cuando cualquiera tiene acceso al mercado global, florecen grandes ideas. Miremos algunos ejemplos de cómo los bitcoins están usándose hoy en día. Puedes comprar videojuegos, regalos, libros, servidores y calcetines de alpaca. Existen varias casas de cambio donde puedes intercambiar tus bitcoins por dólares, euros y más. Los bitcoins son una gran forma para que pequeños negocios y autónomos reciban publicidad. No cuesta nada empezar a aceptarlos, no hay cargos o comisiones y recibirás negocio adicional de la economía Bitcoin. Para tus primeros bitcoins y más información, visita weusecoins.com.
When I first heard this flat earth subject, I dismissed it without even giving it a second thought. But more recently, at the beginning of 2015, I ran across a few flat earth videos again. And while looking into the fake moon photos circulating around, I saw that people were claiming that the images from Earth from space were fake as well. Pretty soon the flat earth subject became viral online. And after looking at the Apollo missions one night and coming to the conclusion that they were nothing more than a huge con game, it jarred my memory about something. And for a very specific reason, I decided to look deeply into the flat earth without just dismissing it blindly as so many do. Why did I look into it this time? Well, I do pray for knowledge and wisdom and discernment, but maybe the recent Apollo footage I watched helped. However, I live near a very large lake, Lake Ontario, and I happen to remember going to the beach as a kid and looking across the lake and seeing New York State coast off in the distance. I never ever thought anything about it ever, except I remember it being there when I went to the beach. Now, I've been to that beach 100 times over the years. And once this topic gained more prominence in early 2015, the first video I saw explained the curvature of the Earth and what it's supposed to be in inches per mile. And it resonated with me because I remember that I could see clear across the lake to the other coast, something that broke all the sphere Earth rules. So with NASA fakery on my mind and the memory of seeing this coastline that supposedly was too far below the horizon for me to be able to see it due to the curvature of the Earth, I re-examined the flat Earth theory. And as unbelievable as it seemed, it started to make a lot of sense, especially since I did distinctly remember being able to see that far coast basically anytime I was at my local beach. And as I've said, I've been there hundreds of times over the years. But even so, I went back to the beach recently and stood at the shore. I looked south and guess what? I could see the New York State coastline just like I remember. Now I googled the distance and it was approximately 36 miles. I learned what the curvature of the Earth is supposed to be exactly at that distance, and according to the people that believe in the sphere, I found out that the coast should have been buried below my ability to see it by almost 900 feet. That part of the New York State coast had a top elevation of less than 300 feet, so that left at least a huge 600-foot discrepancy, and even more because I could see some of the height of the far shore. Was something really wrong with the reality that they've been selling us ever since we were born? Well, I ended up becoming a little fixated on proving or disproving the concept. And at first I truly thought disproving the flat Earth would be rather easy. I thought there had to be a reasonable explanation why I could see so far beyond the so-called curve barrier. I learned about light refraction and superior mirages. I learned about perspective and horizons. I learned about how our eyes work. I viewed dozens of similar experiences on YouTube. I listened to experts and people who thought they had logical but spherical explanations. In fact, I tried for a few months to debunk the concept and just couldn't. The more I looked into it, the more sense it made, and the less likely that the sphere model we've been spoon-fed since birth was a reality. It's just flat out wrong. And as more people shared their experiences and proofs online, it only added to my growing, pretty much unwavering belief that the world is not what we've been told. And learning about how our eyes work and how perspective work helps a lot with understanding sunrises and sunsets and ships disappearing hull first at sea and other supposed sphere Earth proofs. I can't say for certain what shape the Earth is or how big it is, or if there's an Antarctic ring or a barrier beyond it, or if it's an infinite plane. Maybe everything we theorize is not complete. There are so many possibilities that it blows the mind, and the flat Earth has no real complete standard model because it's all based on us finding out things for ourselves. We agree on the facts and certain basics, but the rest is only hypothetical even if it seemingly makes sense. And as the evidence mounts for both the flat earth and against the sphere, I wanted to create a special place where folks can learn and share what they've learned with other supporters. Differences of opinion are certainly going to come forth and should be expressed openly. But remember that the goal of my videos and their corresponding threads is to provide the opportunity to use each of us to learn and grow in any area that any of us has a problem in. If there is a thing you can't understand, then ask. Someone will have an opinion and we can go from there. If you have a point to make against what is considered an accepted flat earth fact, please provide any relevant links or supporting proofs or videos. I am currently under the impression that the entire space program, even low Earth orbit, and all that is there, is really just a sleight of hand trick by a group of illusionists that have swindled the public, the governments of the world, the media, and us into believing a lie. Everybody, a small group of corporations and cabals, have almost complete control over the entire financial, educational, high-level governmental and media systems, leaving it up to real armchair scientists and normal people that can critically think and recreate experiments themselves to independently prove or disprove any accepted line of thought about our reality. Look, I ain't the smartest man on the flat earth, but I ain't no dummy. I'm educated, and I never ever questioned or ever thought of an alternative to a sphere Earth until this year. It never entered my mind to question this part of our reality at all, ever. But now I question everything. I'm a Christian, and I think I see the big picture. Thanks for watching my video. If you'd like to see more proof against the heliocentric model and proof against the sphere, then make sure to subscribe to my channel. And if there's anything you disagree with, make sure you leave a note below explaining exactly why. Remember folks, follow the golden rule. God loves you. We'll talk soon.
Bueno, ahora voy a enseñar algunas imágenes de los dedos de Simpsons. Now I'll show some pictures of the fingers of Simpson. The 4 fingers, los 4 dedos y 5 dedos de Dios. 4 fingers and 5 fingers of God of Simpsons.
The 13th of March.
Español, English, Deutsch. Normalmente produzco solo vídeos en inglés y español. Normally I produce only videos in English and Spanish. Normalerweise produziere ich nur Videos en English und Spanish. Pero hoy voy a hacer otra excepción y traducirlo también en alemán. But today I make another exception and translate it into German too. Aber heute werde ich nochmal eine Ausnahme machen und es auch in Deutsch übersetzen. Ya algunas semanas tengo escrito en mi lista de tareas por hacer de traducir el video #BTC4. Now, already some weeks ago, I have written on my to-do list to translate the video BTC4, Hashtag BTC4. Schon seit ein paar Wochen habe ich auf meiner To-Do-Liste geschrieben, den Video BTC4 in Deutsch zu übersetzen. Estoy segura que esta idea puede ayudar a mucha gente económicamente. I'm sure that this can help many people economically. Ich bin sicher, dass diese Idee vielen Leuten finanziell helfen kann. Y dar motivación para aprender Bitcoin. And give motivation to learn about Bitcoin. Und Motivation geben, um über Bitcoin zu lernen. En este momento el precio de Bitcoin es muy bajo, económico. At the moment the price of Bitcoin is very low, economic. Im Moment ist der Preis von Bitcoin sehr tief. Sería el momento ideal para invertir. Hoy es el 15 de abril 2015. Would be the ideal moment to invest. Today is April 15th, 2015. Es wäre der ideale Moment zu investieren. Heute ist der 15. April 2015. El 27 de marzo 2015 he publicado en mi canal de YouTube Vanos Enigma el primer vídeo sobre hashtag BTC4 explicando cómo me vino esta idea. On March 27th of 2015, I published the first video about hashtag BTC4 in my channel YouTube Vanos Enigma, explaining how I got the idea. Am 27. März 2015 habe ich in meinem YouTube-Channel Vanos Enigma den ersten Video über Hashtag BTC4 veröffentlicht und erklärt, wie ich diese Idee bekommen habe. La idea consiste principalmente en lo siguiente. The idea mainly consists in the following. Die Idee besteht hauptsächlich in folgendem. Imprimir direcciones de Bitcoin en papel, 10 o mínimo 10 o mejor 100. To print Bitcoin directions in paper, at least 10 or better 100. Bitcoin-Adressen in Papier ausdrucken, mínimo 10 oder besser gleich 100. Y luego poner en cada dirección de Bitcoin una pequeña cantidad de Bitcoin. And then put in every Bitcoin direction a little amount of Bitcoin. Und dann in jede Bitcoin-Adresse eine kleine Summe von Bitcoin transferieren. Y la próxima vez, cuando otra vez ves una persona por la calle pidiendo dinero, and the next time you see again a person begging for money on the street, Und das nächste Mal, wenn du wieder eine Person auf der Straße betteln siehst, y para tus amigos y amigas, and for your friends, of course, und für deine Freunde natürlich, o tal vez de propina en un restaurante, or maybe a tip in a restaurant, oder Trinkgeld im Restaurant. Bueno, a la hora de imprimir también copiar y guardar las llaves privadas de Bitcoin, de direcciones de Bitcoin. When you print the Bitcoin addresses, copy and save the private keys of the Bitcoin addresses, of course. Wenn man die Bitcoin-Adressen druckt, auch die privaten Schlüssel, Bitcoin-Address-Schlüsseln kopieren und speichern. Y a la hora de distribuir las direcciones de Bitcoin, escribir la fecha, por ejemplo, hoy es el 15 de abril 2015, escribir la fecha más plus 4 años, igual 15 de abril 2019. And then in the moment when you distribute the Bitcoin addresses, you write the date, for example, today, April 15th, 2015, plus 4 years is April 15th, 2019. Und dann in dem Moment, wenn man die Bitcoin-Adressen verteilt, auf das Papier schreiben, das heutige Datum, zum Beispiel 15. April 2015, plus 4 Jahre ist gleich 15.04.2019. Luego vas a explicar a la gente, mira, esta es la llave privada, tú y yo la tienes. Si no quitas, transfieres este dinero de Bitcoin en estos 4 años, yo lo vuelvo a tener o sacar. Then you explain to the people, look, this is the private key. I have it and you have it. If you don't take this money, Bitcoin, out of this account, I will take it out in these 4 years, at the end of these 4 years. Und dann erklärst du den Leuten, schau, das ist der private Schlüssel. Ich und du haben diesen privaten Schlüssel, Bitcoin-Schlüssel. Wenn du bis Ende dieser 4 Jahre das Geld Bitcoin nicht raustust, Transfer, dann hole ich es zurück. De esta forma das más motivación a la gente para empezar a aprender cómo funciona Bitcoin. This way you give more motivation to the people to learn how the technology of Bitcoin functions. Auf diese Weise gibst du mehr Motivation den Leuten zu lernen, wie die Technologie von Bitcoin funktioniert. En mi video antiguo
you're saying 16 MB does it come through your paper, information propagation in the Bitcoin network?
Yes, that's exactly the publication I was talking about. That's basically us trying to point out the natural limits of what the network can support. And we thought we could analyze how blockchain forks came to be and then take the blockchain forks as an sort of a symptom of not being able to reconcile the global state of the network anymore. And we have found that larger blocks also lead to a slower propagation in the network. No, not much of a surprise there, but we have a few numbers in there as well, namely that at the time, about 1 kilobyte of extra data would result in the median time of node noticing a block was delayed by 80 milliseconds. So that is probably faster today. And we do have a new publication coming out, hopefully sometime soon, which actually shows that there has been an improvement over time. But it still remains the problem that we cannot scale too quickly to larger block sizes.
So let's get like an on the ground feel for this number. So what you're saying is, if you add 1 kilobyte to the block, the median propagation time increases by 80 milliseconds. So that means if you add one MB to the block, it would affect the median propagation time by 80 seconds, right?
Mm-hmm.
So basically what you're saying
that was back then, I have to say. So
that was back then. So let's say let's just to see, just as a thought experiment, let's say that number held true today. When you go from say 1 MB to 10 MB, so you are adding 9 more MBs, then the median propagation time would be say impacted 9 times into 80, so that's like 720 seconds, right? So that is over 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And 10 minutes is the block time for Bitcoin. What would happen if one block needs more than 10 minutes to propagate to the network? What would happen to the network in that scenario?
So our expectation is that the first block would basically split the network in half, because by the time we have reached a majority of the network, we already have a second block propagating through the network. Or we have an expectation one block propagating in the network already. So that way we would definitely create a hard blockchain fork. Now the resulting network is smaller, so the two partitions of the network are smaller, but they will work on competing blockchain forks, right? Now, it is possible that we then lose, that we then find another block in one of these partitions and find again another block in this partition. At this point, we have a three-headed blockchain fork, and this will not be resolved in a single next round of blocks being found, right? So what we actually lose is one confirmation on the number of confirmations. We have to wait for us to be certain that the transaction goes through. And the extreme case is that we actually fork off indefinitely.
Yeah. So basically, you start having. But let's say if you take this scale back a little bit, we say, okay, it's not 720 seconds, so 12 minutes, but let's say it's 4 minutes that it takes to propagate. Then we are still left with a scenario that there are a lot of forks all the time, and they go deeper than just one block. They can happen 2 blocks deep, or maybe even 3 in a worst case, in a bad case. So you start having very probably behaviors that you don't want.
So I mean, it's quite amazing how far we got with Bitcoin and similar technologies. That was an interesting meeting back then, yeah.
So you've been interested in the topic sort of continuously since then?
Yeah. I would say I have been following Bitcoin for a long time. I think my first involvement was trying to reverse engineer the protocol. Part of the protocol specification or documentation, as it's called today, was made by me and one other guy, I guess. Yeah, I was involved quite a long time, and I just stopped mining a few days ago.
Oh, really?
After 6.5 years, yeah, that kind of hurt.
So you had what, like Butterfly Labs or KNC equipment, and you were running that at home?
I had one of the first edition jalapenos, and yeah, that stuck with me for a long time, and now it was time to shut it off because it's not worth it anymore.
Cool. That's fascinating. Actually, I didn't realize you had been such an early adopter and so deeply involved for such a long time.
I guess it was just lucky, and yeah, it also brought me some headlines when in 2012 9,000 bitcoins were stolen from my wallet. So
From your wallet?
yeah, I actually managed to lose 9,000 bitcoins to a hacker, but it got me on the front page of the New York Times. So
Wow, you would have been a millionaire with that stash.
yeah, so people keep telling me.
Yeah, I personally, I don't know if I would have paid 9,000 bitcoins to be on the front page of the New York Times. But
I mean that's one of the perks of being an early adopter, right? You somehow mined all these coins, and you didn't invest anything, and then you lost them, and so yeah.
It's like you lost a lottery ticket, but one that actually won.
so actually, that makes it particularly.
This episode of Epicenter Bitcoin is brought to you by Shapeshift. With no account or sign-up required, it's the easiest way to buy and sell gems, Counterparty, Dogecoin, Dash, and other leading cryptocurrencies. Go to shapeshift.io to instantly convert your altcoins and to discover the future of cryptocurrency exchanges.
Welcome to Epicenter Bitcoin, the show which talks about the technologies, projects, and startups driving decentralization and the global cryptocurrency revolution. My name is Brian Fabian Crane.
And I'm Meher Roy. Today we are joined by Christian Decker, who is a researcher at ETH Zurich. He has a very interesting idea about scaling Bitcoin using off-chain networks. First, we would like to have an introduction from you, Christian.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having me. I'm, as you said, I'm a researcher at ETH Zurich. I am also one of the early adopters of Bitcoin, you can say. I started in 2009, a few weeks after the original paper, and I thought, heck, that's a nice thing. I would like to try that. And later, when it came time to choose a topic for my PhD, I didn't have to look too hard to basically say, hey, Bitcoin might be a good topic. Took some time to convince my professor, but in the end, it turned out to be the greatest topic he had for a long time.
Wow, I didn't realize it was 2009, because I don't know actually who's the person we've had on the show who was earliest involved in Bitcoin. So I guess Mike Hearn, was he 2009 or 2010? Gavin Andreessen was 2010, I guess, no?
I'm not sure. We actually had the first Zurich Bitcoin Meetup was in 2011 with Mike Hearn and Stefan Thomas from today's Ripple.
Right,
so,
right. Yeah,
it's quite
really interesting, no? Because we have talked about this topic again and again, and we keep coming back to it, which is this sort of topic of scaling Bitcoin, and one of your ideas that we'll talk about in a little bit does relate to that. But I'm sure you, as someone who's sort of been through that whole history. You have a lot of opinions on that in general. So how have you been participating and thinking about this debate and controversy and arguments that are going on about the block size increase and how Bitcoin can be scaled?
Yeah, I mean the whole topic of the blockchain block size increase is less of a technical problem. I have to say it's more about economics and incentives. And it also strongly depends on what we want to achieve with this network. I mean, in my first publication, I basically showed that there are some natural limits to how many transactions the network can support, and that was 3 years ago. And I basically used that as a starting off point for the remainder of my research. But the limits were a lot higher than what we are talking about today, which is 1 or 2 or 8 megabytes. I don't have the current numbers, but I would believe that we can support 16 megabyte blocks without too many problems. That's a natural limit, I'd say. At that point, the network just isn't fast enough to propagate the block through the network so that the majority knows about this block before a new block being found in the remainder of the network. That being said, we have some lower limits which are of an economical nature, meaning that at some point it just becomes unfeasible for people to participate in this network. I'm definitely not an expert on those kind of issues, but I would say we can definitely support slightly larger blocks today.
So this one is this higher limit of